Well, greetings, everyone. Greetings and good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Clark. I'm an associate professor of mathematics education in the College of Education in the Department of Teaching and Learning Policy and Leadership. It's a mouthful, but we're a big, happy family. I would like to welcome you to the second annual Dean's Lecture on Education and Society. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Jennifer Rice. Dean Rice was appointed Dean of the University of Maryland College of Education in 2017. Previously, she served as an Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Faculty Affairs, and has been a Professor of Education Policy since 2009. Dr. Rice's research draws on the discipline of economics to explore education policy questions concerning the efficiency, equity, and adequacy of U.S. education systems. She earned her PhD and MS degrees in Education Administration and Social Foundations from Cornell University, and her BS was completed at Marquette University. Please join me in welcoming Dean Rice.
Thank you, Lawrence. I am just absolutely delighted to welcome you all to the second annual Dean's Lecture on Education and Society. I want to extend a special welcome to Dr. William and to all of us, Brit, Kirwan, to the many distinguished guests, including a number of members of the University Board of Trustees and members of our College of Education Board of Visitors. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to thank the many faculty, staff, and students from the College of Education, members of the broader university community who are here, and leaders and colleagues from our state and local school systems. I want to welcome you all, and thank you so much for coming. I want to begin by saying just a few words about this lecture series and its significance. Reflecting the mission of our college, this lecture series, called the Dean's Lecture on Education and Society, brings together scholars, leaders, students, public intellectuals, faculty members, community members to discuss some of the most pressing and contested issues in our society, and to consider the role of education in helping to deal with some of those issues. Our college has a long-standing commitment to work that enhances the lives of individuals, of families, of schools and communities through our research, our teaching and instructional programs, and our community outreach and civic engagement. This Dean's Lecture Series is just one more effort to promote this kind of positive change in education and in the society that surrounds us. The framing of the series is intentionally broad, and when I say intentionally, I mean it. I stew over things like this. And we decided to go very broad to recognize the fundamental role of education in realizing the social, civic, and economic goals and goods in our society. We all know that ensuring access to high-quality education and instruction is critical. Too often, however, our systems have failed. Schools have struggled with challenges of inadequate funding, misguided policy, poverty, violence, racism. There are so many threats to providing a high-quality education to every student. The way forward requires a public commitment to public education at both the K-12 and the higher education levels. A commitment that reflects the social values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it improves the opportunities, outcomes, and full participation of all individuals in our society. Just last year, we were honored to have Dr. John King lead a provocative discussion about advancing the civic mission of higher education. And tonight, with this lecture, we expand the conversation to the important issue of equity and excellence in Maryland K-12 schools. We are honored to have Brit Kirwan, Chancellor Emeritus of the University System of Maryland and Chair of the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, perhaps better known to you all as the Kirwan Commission, after its very capable leader. The Kirwan Commission was charged by the Maryland legislature in 2016 with a very, very ambitious directive to carefully re-examine the education funding formula in Maryland, to hear from national experts on world-class education systems and what it would take to get there, and to make recommendations for improving education in Maryland through funding, policies, and resources that will prepare Maryland students to meet the challenges of a changing global economy, to meet our state's workforce needs, to be prepared for post-secondary education and workforce demands, and to be successful citizens in the 21st century. This was a serious charge, a really tall order, and Brit and his commission took it on. They dedicated countless hours to the task, and their recommendations are comprehensive and evidence-based. And I want to reiterate evidence-based. Being a policy scholar for the past 25 years, that means a lot to have a commission this important take research into account as they made their recommendations. These recommendations have profound implications for the quality and the equity of education in the state of Maryland. On a more personal note, I attended the vast majority of these meetings, and I have to say, there were a lot of meetings. And I was utterly impressed with Brit's masterful ability to navigate an incredibly wide range of interests represented at the table, and to lead the group to near consensus on these recommendations. And he has subsequently served as a tireless ambassador for these recommendations and the funding, and perhaps most importantly, the accountability systems needed to support them. Indeed, the recommendations received broad support from the Maryland State Legislature during the just this past 2019 session. The Assembly approved a bill that includes more than $800 million in additional public school funding to support the Commission's recommendations. I'm proud that our College of Education has been and plans to remain an active participant in informing state education policy that's evidence-based and supported by the latest research. A number of our faculty and alumni provided testimony and input into the Kirwan Commission and the General Assembly recommendations, and many of those recommendations were incorporated into the General Assembly's bills. Implementing such sweeping legislation will undoubtedly require continued participation by the College of Education and other important stakeholders around the state in helping to support ongoing evidence-based policy and practice. Looking forward, the implementation of these recommendations will require not only resources, but carefully designed policies to support greater equity, excellence, and innovation in education so that all students have the opportunity to learn. In my view, the work of the Kirwan Commission charts a very powerful and important course for a stronger and more equitable education system in Maryland. Let me just say before I formally introduce Brit, this lecture series would not be possible without the critical support of some very important people. We have been humbled and honored by the generous philanthropic support of the Clairvit family over the years. They provided us with the financial support for this lecture series. Thank you to Allie Clairvit, who earned her undergraduate degree in 2013 and her master's degree in 2014 and is currently a member of our college's Board of Visitors. Allie's mother, Nancy Clairvit, of the class of 1978 and a member of the University Board of Trustees, and Allie's father, Chuck, and brother, Sam. We're grateful to their family and their support for this work. And I would now like to welcome to the stage Dr. William Kirwan. Dr. Kirwan is Chancellor Emeritus of the University System of Maryland. He is a recognized authority on critical issues facing higher education, and I'm going to add now K-12 education. He served as Chancellor of the University System of Maryland for 13 years, President of Ohio State University for 4 years, and President of the University of Maryland, College Park for 10 years. As mentioned earlier, he chairs the Maryland Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, and among his many honors is the 2010 TIAA-CREF Theodore M. Hesburgh Award for Leadership Education. In 2009, he received the Carnegie Corporation Leadership Award. He was recently inducted into the Maryland Business and Civic Leaders Hall of Fame and was elected to membership in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2002. The list of accolades goes on, but I'm going to stop there because you're here to hear from Dr. Kirwan. Brit?
Wow. Let's go to the reception, folks. That was so nice. Thank you so much, Jennifer, first for the wonderful wonderful introduction. I heard someone once say that it's the kind of introduction that would have made my father very proud, but only my mother would have truly believed. I also want to thank you, only for the honor of giving this lecture, but for creating the lecture series, because it's hard to think of anything more important for the advancement of a society than high-quality education. And having people come and having conversation and dialogue on this topic is obviously so very, very important. When Jennifer asked me to come and do this lecture, I agreed to do so, but with some trepidation. Now, I go around and talk about the Commission's work all the time, but I'm talking to business leaders and lawyers and the general public. And, you know, believe it or not, I actually know more than they do about education. But now I'm before an audience that knows a lot more than I do about education. So, but I said, yes, I'm so committed to this that I will go before this well-informed group and offer my perspective. So, the title is Equity and Excellence in Maryland Education. And just to give a little historical perspective on how we got to the Commission's work, it really is an outgrowth. Maryland has struggled for decades over the issue of equity in education. One of the more well-known incidences in the state was back in 1966. There was a lawsuit, Bradford versus the State Board of Education, over funding for the Baltimore City schools. They took this to the courts, and the city, Bradford, the plaintiffs, actually won the lawsuit. However, before the judge made the final settlement in the lawsuit, the plaintiffs and the state came together on an agreement. And so that ended the lawsuit. However, a few years later, the plaintiffs were back in the court on the same issue. And by this time, other jurisdictions were willing to join the lawsuit. And so what the state decided to do was to create a commission called the Thornton Commission, which I think we're all quite familiar with. And the Thornton Commission was created in 1999 and charged to look at the issues that have been raised about funding equity, but also how to advance the quality of education in the state. And they worked away, just like our commission did. In the 2002 legislative session, a major bill was passed basically embracing the Thornton Commission recommendations. And it called for a very significant increase in funding for schools phased in over 5 or 6 years. And then after that, to be updated with cost of inflation increases. The Thornton funding formula was very innovative, at least at that time, because it created sort of a foundation amount of funding that every child should be entitled to. Then on top of it, it had weights for students living in low economic circumstances, special education needs, English as a second language, and that was built on top of the foundation amount. And then there was this large number that the funding increase, and the funds were roughly divided 50-50 between the state and the local jurisdictions. But again, it was a very innovative formula because it was wealth adjusted. So wealthier counties paid more, and the locals in those counties, the locals paid more and the state paid less, and then in low-income counties, just the reverse was true. And so we got off to this start with the Thornton Commission in 2002, and the state agreed that roughly in 10 years we would need to revisit the Thornton Commission work. And lo and behold, this became the Maryland Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, sort of in part meeting the commitment to review the Thornton work. And I give the governor and the General Assembly a lot of credit. There was Governor Hogan and the General Assembly in 2016, and they gave the commission a very forward-looking charge. The Thornton Commission wasn't so much about policy decisions to improve excellence. It was more about funding. When this commission was created, as Jennifer said, we were expected to develop policies and practices, and this is taken straight from the charge, that the schools would perform at the level of the world's best systems, and to develop cost estimates and funding formulas, update Thornton to support the recommendations of the commission. Now, you can imagine the 25-member commission, and this is an important thing for people to understand, was carefully selected, so basically every organization, official organization involved in K through 12 education was represented on the commission. The collective bargaining units, the superintendents, the State Board of Education, the county commissioners, the business community, 8 members of the General Assembly. And every one of them came to the commission knowing exactly what had to be done to fix education. Only problem was there were 25 different opinions. So you can imagine the challenge with such a diverse and eclectic group of members of the commission. On the other hand, it's the only way we could possibly have come to a report that would gain support, and if you don't bring everybody to the table and reach some sort of agreement, then they will all pick at the report from afar. So we got off to work, and the first thing we had to do was to, if we're supposed to make recommendations so our schools perform at the level of the best performing school systems in the world, where are we today? And we came, I think, to a person, to the commission, thinking that Maryland has really good schools. I mean, we have a fine school system. And to our great dismay, we learned that although we have a lot of very good schools and excellent teachers, we don't have nearly enough of them. So, for example, one of the things that really got our attention is the scores on the NAPE exam. Now, I'm going to assume there's one person in this audience that doesn't know what NAPE is. There's probably only one, but NAPE is the National Assessment of Education Progress, mandated by the federal government, given in every 50 states, same exam to 4th and 8th graders in math and reading. And so imagine our shock when we saw where the 2015 scores placed Maryland schools. And that's not something to be very proud of. And we also learned that we get these scores in every other year. We haven't got the 2017, or they're about to come out. I'm not sure exactly which. But if you go back to 2013, listen to this. We are the only state in the nation whose scores dropped on all 4 exams. So not only are we in the middle of the pack, we're going in the wrong direction. And of course, that would be bad enough if the U.S. was this shining city on the hill with regard to education, but we all know we're not. I'm sure you know what the PISA exam is, and it is at least one measure of how our kids do on international comparisons given to 15-year-olds in reading, math, and science, and that's where we place in the scores. So one of the hard, cold facts the commission had to confront is that here we are to make recommendations so we are perform at the level of the best performing schools in the world, and we're very mediocre in a country that performs at a mediocre level. So this is a huge lift. But this wasn't all. We learned that Maryland is actually one of the most regressive states in the union in terms of funding equity. Now, this was a shock. I mean, we all think of Maryland as a very progressive state. But if you look at New Jersey and Massachusetts, you'll hear more about them in a minute, were two states that we used as benchmarks. And actually, New Jersey wasn't, but Massachusetts was. In any case, if you look at schools that have no low-income students, put them in one category. And then you look at schools that have at least 30% low-income students. And how do these three states treat those students? Well, New Jersey spends $3,000 more per student on the schools serving more low-income students. Massachusetts spends $1,500 more. Maryland spends $1,200 less. Now, you know, we all know that if you grow up in poverty, you need extra support. There isn't a high-performing school system in the world that doesn't understand and adjust to take into account for poverty. But that's not all what we learned that was troubling. We also, as I think everyone knows, have these unfortunate achievement gaps based on income and race. But again, this was just so shocking and troubling to us, but let me explain this piece of data. Thornton had this funding formula, and it was, you know, it tells how much schools are supposed to have out into the future. And so if you take the schools that have, at this moment, 85% or less of what Thornton said they should have back in 2002, so we're going to call those substantially underfunded schools. Now, it turns out that 53% of African American students in the state of Maryland attend substantially underfunded schools, and only 8% of white students do. Now, that cannot continue. Well, we're not done yet, folks. We're going to get to some better news in a minute, but here was another thing that got our attention. Fewer than 40% of students will graduate this spring from high school assessed as college and career ready. Now, that's bad enough, but let me tell you what the college and career ready standard is for Maryland at the moment. It means that you can read at the 10th grade level and pass an Algebra 1 exam. If you can do those two things, you're college and career ready. We know you're not college and career ready, but that's where we are in Maryland. Oh, less than 40% of our high school graduates this spring, or June, whenever they graduate, will be deemed college and career ready by that standard. What does that mean for our state as we look to the future? Okay, one more slide of gloom and doom, which we hope to correct. We all know that teacher salaries are not what they should be. That's true across the country, and we've seen really aggressive, outspoken efforts by teachers around the country to address this issue of compensation. But in Maryland, the teachers' salaries for teachers are 25% below comparable educated individuals in our society, accountants, nurses, and architects. Of course, we have big teacher shortages in STEM areas, but here is a huge challenge for our state. If you take all the teachers coming out of our teacher prep programs or recruited from out of state, they come to Maryland, they're now in their second year of teaching, 47% of them, almost half, won't come back for a third year. So teaching, unfortunately, is no longer a career for these young people, it's a revolving door. How do you build a strong school system with that kind of churn in teaching? So we had all of this information. We understood began to get some grip on the challenges we face at a state. And remember now, we've got to take where we are and make recommendations to get us to where we want to be. And I think we all know why this is so important. How are you going to build and sustain a dynamic economy if 40%, fewer than 40% of your high school graduates aren't college and career ready? And I think even more, and this to me becomes almost an ethical, moral issue. How are we going to enable young children to get out of poverty if we don't provide them with the education and tools they need to be successful in this ever-changing economy? So how did we go about our work? Every time you email a PowerPoint, the spacing changes, so I apologize for that, but nothing I can do about it now. NCEE. NCEE is the National Center for Education and the Economy. It's a think tank in D.C. that's been around for quite some time. I think it's very highly regarded. It's led by a gentleman by the name of Mark Tucker. And I tell people that, I kind of naively took on this assignment as chairing the commission. My beloved wife, Patty, used to tell me my biggest problem is I can never say no. And so I took on this, but what do I know about international education? So I mentioned to people that, sometimes manna does drop from heaven. And we learned on the commission about NCEE. So what has NCEE done? They have spent the last 20, 25 years studying what makes high-quality, strong school systems. And they have, these strong school systems exist in different economic circumstances, in different geopolitical circumstances, in different geographies of the world, but they all have practiced these so-called building blocks of high-performing systems. And so the way we went about our work is that we took 7 school systems, 4 international, as you see on the slide, Finland, Ontario, Shanghai, and Singapore, and 3 U.S. school systems, only one of which, we'll get to that later, performs at a high international level, but we had to have some U.S. comparisons. And what we did is we did a painstaking, excruciating benchmarking effort. That's what we did. We undertook. We wanted to understand. We wanted to benchmark what Maryland does against these building blocks and what the high performers do. And so basically, our report is filling in those gaps. That's what our report does. But I want to emphasize something Jennifer says. This isn't 25 people sitting around a room sort of dreaming up how we could make education better. This is a careful analysis of what the best performers do and how we can change what we're doing to emulate what they do against these 9 building blocks. So out of this process, we ended up with 5 major policy recommendations. And maybe during the discussion later, we'll go into them in more depth. But the 5 are: first, we have to invest more money in early childhood education. And so the big idea here is that there would be free, full-day preschool for every low-income 3- and 4-year-old in the state, not just any preschool. It will have to meet a certain standard of quality. Now, the State Department of Education has this Excels standard for quality, grades 1 through 5. And so what the commission has said is that initially, private providers, if they are a 3, can participate in the early childhood, and public providers, if there are 4, can participate. But within 5 years, everybody's got to be at a 5, at the top level of preschool, because the data show if you have high quality preschool, it has an impact. But if it's not high quality, it doesn't get to where we want people, where the kids to be. The idea here is to get many more kids coming to kindergarten ready to learn. We didn't stop with just early childhood education. We also said that we need to, there's something called the Family Service Centers, which exist. There's a few of them around the state. They exist to provide prenatal and postnatal training for young mothers living in difficult economic circumstances about nutrition, about child rearing. And so we know that getting ready to learn starts from the moment of birth. And so we've called for a significant expansion in the family service centers around the state, and also a significant expansion of the Judy centers, which work with kids from 3 to 5 years old. Secondly, and this is obviously a critical issue for the college and all the teacher preparation programs, we have to transform teaching and school leadership into a high-status, merit-based profession. You cannot find a high-performing school system in the world where that isn't the case. For too long, we've relied on the goodwill of well-intentioned people to go into, make enormous personal sacrifices to go into teaching. We can't get where we need to be if we don't step up and make teaching a high-status profession. So there's lots in this to unpack in this recommendation, and again, we're probably best doing that during the question and answer period, but the idea here is we're asking the teacher preparation programs to up their game, better prepare young people and teachers in content areas and in classroom management, in cultural competence, and raise certification standards. And once all of that is in place, to introduce a merit-based career ladder for teachers so that good teachers can stay in the classroom and having a career, and eventually benchmark teachers' salaries against other professions requiring the same level of education. That's how we will make teaching a high-status profession. Implement a rigorous curriculum, interlocking, benchmarked against international standards. The big idea here is to target all kids to be at college and career ready by as many as we can by the 10th grade. College and career ready mean you can take an entry-level community college course without remediation. To me, that's what college and career ready would be. So, and once you meet this in the 10th grade, or when you meet it, there would be pathways, advanced placement pathways, early college pathways, and a rigorous career and technical education pathway. We want to bring in the trades and the private sector, as they do in high-performing countries around the world, and have a really rigorous career and technical education. There are such incredible jobs out there for people. They would finish in this pathway with an industry recognized certification, so they could step right into a job paying $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Fourth recommendation is to address the equity issue in funding. And we applaud the weights that are added to the foundation amount for kids living in low-income circumstances, but that's not enough. So the big idea here is that we came to understand that it's not enough to have extra funds for a kid that's living in poor economic circumstances. The number of such kids in a school also affects the quality of education. And so what we're proposing is a new weight that adds additional funds as the level of concentration of poverty rises. Finally, and this has caused a little heartburn around the state, but you know, whenever I go to a business community and talk about this, they love the first 4 recommendations. But then they say, how do we know if we invest this money that we're going to get any results? We didn't with Thornton, so why do you think it's going to happen now? And for whatever reason, I'm not saying it's justified or not, there isn't confidence that the State Board of Education can bring home the accountability by itself. It'll be an important player, but it needs help. And so what the commission has recommended is that there be a modest-sized 7 to 10, very high-level commission of recognized people who have great integrity and reputation in the state, who know about education in some instances, but maybe have been a CEO of an organization that has made substantial change. And anyway, you get this high-level group, and they would have to certify that the LEAs had faithfully implemented the commission's recommendations in order to get all of the funding. And they would have to show that they're making progress to get additional funding. And when they're not, you know, there'd be teams of experts that would go into the schools and help them get it right. So this is what we are saying about accountability. So now where are we? After all this work, late last year, we got a letter from the presiding officers in the General Assembly saying that they would not be able to deal with the policy recommendations and the division of costs between the state and the locals in a 90-day session with so many new members. So they asked that we work on the distribution between the state and the locals for the new funds over the summer and come back with a recommendation in the fall. And so we, in January, produced our policy recommendations with the total costs for the plan, a detailed 10-year implementation plan in all 5 policy areas, phased in over 10 years, as I said, with expenditures rising by $3.8 billion per year by the 10th year. Now that's a lot of money, but we need it. The General Assembly in the last session wisely set aside some funds to kind of jumpstart the commission's work in fiscal 20, and we made recommendations how to spend that. And so we produced this report for the governor and the General Assembly. So the General Assembly gets the bill, and they gets our recommendations, and they created this bill, which is called the blueprint. And apparently they were very specific about the word the blueprint for Maryland's future. The presiding officers, the Speaker and the President, and plus all the members, the legislators on the commission were sponsors of the bill. And let me tell you, when you have a bill before the General Assemblies, it's always nice to have the presiding officers as a sponsor, for sure. So what does the bill do? It embraces the commission's policy framework. The bill says this is how we're going to operate K through 12 education in the future, in the broadest sense. They embrace the policy recommendations. It allocates $255 million in fiscal year 20 to jumpstart. It provides $355 million in fiscal year 21 and up to $500 million in fiscal 22 as a portion of the state share for the implementations of the recommendations. Now, the bill was overwhelmingly adopted, and this is a really important point. I want to emphasize the overwhelming adoption. I was nervous as a cat when this was coming up before the legislature. I thought, all this work, it won't pass. What's going to happen? I mean, I truly was. So on the morning of the bill, that the bill was going to be before the Senate, Rachel Heist, if you don't know Rachel Heist, you should. She is a state treasurer. She was the chief staff person for the commission. She works for the Department of Legislative Sessions. She calls me up and she says, Brit, the Republican caucus wants to meet with you. This is the bill. So I go in there thinking this is going to be rough. I get in there and they start saying there are things in this report they like. And so I answered questions and they raised some questions and so on and so forth. And I walked out of the room and I turned to Rachel and I said, Rachel, I think some of them might vote for this bill. So that afternoon, I'm in the gallery, and they introduce the bill, and the debate starts. And about halfway into the debate, the chair of the Republican caucus stands up and says, you know, we met with Dr. Kirwan this morning, and we believe this bill, this is not what we've done in the past. This is a new way of doing things. We think this bill is the right way to go for Maryland. And the bill passed unanimously in the Senate. Now, what's so important about that is that it shows the bipartisan support. So I went over to the House, and there were, I forget how many members of the House there are, 400 and some odd, 421, is that right? 41. Huh? 141. And there were only 20 negative votes in the House. So, you know, 85% support in the House. Incidentally, that voice from the back was the dulcet tones of Jim Rosapep, Senator James Rosapep, who, I want to mention, has been an enormous supporter of this effort. And in fact, I credit him more than anyone else for the strength of our recommendations on CTE. He helped us get to where we needed to be in this critical area. So the commission isn't done because we've got to come back now and make recommendations on how to divide up the costs and do that by November. And then there'll be another moment of truth in the next legislative session. But we come out of this session with enormous momentum in a very positive way. So here are my final thoughts. The commission has developed what I genuinely believe would be transformative for our K-12 school system. I mean, these aren't recommendations and initiatives pulled out of thin air. These are things that work. They're research-based. We know they will work. So we have a report that could be transformative for education, and Lord knows we need it. Now, the cost is significant, and some will say, we can't afford it. But I ask you, can we afford for our state to be in a situation where there's fewer than 40% of our high school graduates are college and career ready? We can't afford it. We are a wealthy state. It's a matter of priorities. What do we want our state to be? So finally, I mentioned there was one state that performs at a national, international level, and that's Massachusetts. Massachusetts, back in the 80s, did something like what we're doing, what we did with this commission. Not as detailed as what we've done in all areas, but one of the things they did was they significantly upgraded the certification standards for teachers and paid them a lot more. And they made other reforms. Now, they have significant achievement gaps in Massachusetts, which isn't good. But what has happened in Massachusetts, if they had a gap, it's all risen. And they haven't closed the gaps, and they recognize it, and they're working on Massachusetts at this moment. what we think is with our recommendations that we can actually do both. Rise to that level and close these achievement gaps. And I've often said, you know, if Massachusetts can do this, by golly, Maryland can too. And, you know, I just close with this. This is really a critical moment for our state. We can continue, as we are, making incremental changes and hope that the system we have will make us a little less mediocre. Or we can do something really big and bold and set a bright future, not just for our state, but for all of our children in the state. And I think maybe be a beacon for the rest of the country to finally get education right. Thank you very much.
Brit, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation on some really important and consequential work, to be sure, so thank you. We've saved a lot of time for questions and answers and discussion and conversation. I want to welcome Dr. Lawrence Clark up to the stage to help us with this. While he's coming up, there are microphones in the middle aisle. We're going to use those for questions, so if you have any questions, please come on up to those microphones.
Good evening, Dr. Kern. Thank you very much for the great work that you're doing with the Kern Commission. Maryland, I like to brag to my sister in North Carolina that Maryland is a high-performing state, so I'm a little apprehensive now to be so braggadocious about Maryland. But it's not only doom and gloom. We're looking forward to the great work within the Kern Commission to help our students be those 21st century learners that we're looking forward to. So my name is Dr. Cham, and I'm a special educator at a Western Maryland school district. And in my school district, we're suffering with a lot of opioid addiction with families, and of course that impacts children socially, emotionally. They're coming to school as kindergartners unprepared. Lots of trauma that they've faced in the homes, that a lot of teachers find it very challenging to work with these students in their classrooms. Where in the Kern Commission, if there is a place to help our teachers, to help our families who are struggling with such addictions, to help their children and their learners be more well-rounded students in our society?
Great question. And incidentally, what school district?
Western Maryland.
Yeah, when you say Western Maryland?
Washington County.
Washington County,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. A great question, and it is such an important issue. One of the recommendations is in the report is that school districts, schools that are serving high concentrations of low-income students would become community schools. Now, I don't know whether that's a widely used term, but it's a precise definition. If you're a community school, you get extra resources to bring counselors into the school, both health, emotional counselors. So there are added resources into schools to help the children and the families of the students cope with some of the issues that they're experiencing. It also provides, to be a community school, also provides funds for after-school academic programs, summer academic enrichment, to help kids get caught up and stay on track. So we heard a lot during the commission hearings about the need for greater counseling, both health and mental counseling in the schools. And that was a big driver in our recommendation about the creation of these community schools for all school districts serving low-income kids, and to include in that the social and mental counseling that they need. We're also one of our recommendations when we talk about increasing the caliber, the rigor of our teacher preparation programs, we need to better prepare our teachers for the classrooms that they're going into. You know, to be honest, a lot of kids come from middle class, come to a university like University of Maryland, start in teacher education, and they're not used to the experience of teaching classrooms with such great diversity that includes a lot of kids in low-income circumstances. So preparing our teachers better for the actual classrooms they will be in is one of the strong recommendations as we rethink our teacher preparation, the curriculum in our teacher preparation programs.
Can I just speak to the curriculum
Sure,
as
please.
it relates to this issue? As Jennifer said, I've been involved in assisting and supporting our educator preparation efforts. And one of the things that I've noticed, particularly at the secondary level, is we give very little curricular space to health of our students, to our students' social and mental and emotional conditions. But through the Kirwan Commission, I'm hoping that through maybe some of the collaboratives that are being proposed in the Kirwan Commission, in which a university and a school district can partner around thorny issues, there are ways that we can impact, and maybe in pockets at first, to test out new curricula, new ways of thinking about how we might support students, because it's not going to go away anytime soon. And unfortunately, we are already packing the curriculum so tight with so much the knowledge, the skills, the training that teachers need, but we have to prioritize. Like sometimes you just have to prioritize, and we have to share that learning, not just in the educator preparation program, but into the induction years, and share some of these experiences with our partner districts so that our candidates can get a full range of experiences that don't just happen in the educator preparation program.
One real quick comment, then we'll come to the question, but I'm so glad you mentioned the collaboratives, because one of the things that will occur in the funding this year, for fiscal year 20, is the grant funds for teacher preparation programs to work with school districts to begin thinking about curricular changes, to begin work on this merit-based career ladder, to try to create some models of what the career ladder might look like. So I sat there on that commission thinking, boy, I hope College Park applies for some of these grants, because I can't think of a better place to partner with the school districts to get some really new thinking and creative ideas out there. So I think you're already planning on.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Rest assured, we will be applying.
Great.
Hi, I'm
Hi,
Barbara
Barbara.
Shapiro. I'm a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Education, a few years before most of you were born. I'm a friend of Brenda's. I appreciate everything that she does. And I have a question. Our school system was set up during the time it was an Maryland was an agrarian society. We've passed that a long time ago. As an ex-teacher, I can tell you how much is lost during the summer vacation, 3 months, when children then come back and you have to start all over again,
Right.
and you miss another 3 months, that's 6 months, half the year. Has there any thought in the Kirwan Commission about having schools open full-time? Even if, and the work of the summer can be done, there's a group called Young Audiences, which you've probably heard about, a Baltimore group, that has a teacher and an artist work together in a summer program, where these kids learn math and reading through rap, through dancing, as Brenda's school did in STEP. Has any thought been given to doing that? I think it's the most important thing that can be done to change the system, and it's not about the money. The vacations can be staggered 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and 2 weeks. You still get 6 weeks vacation in the summer, but it shouldn't be in one block. Has
Right.
any thought been given to that at your commission?
There was discussion on this. Of course, you know that a certain decision was made to start schools
I heard.
after Labor Day.
I didn't vote for him.
But you know, I agree completely with you. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. One thing that was pointed out to us, however, is that when you look around the globe, the length of the school year varies dramatically. In some countries, they do have year-round schools, but there are high-performing school systems that don't. And so it was a topic of discussion, but there was no specific recommendation
I also
based on the
think
school
it
year.
would benefit our state financially, because if that made our school systems one of the best in the East Coast, more industries would want to come
Right.
here. More people would want to come here because they had a children's education around
Right.
the whole season. And if I were a poor, single parent who had 3 children and I had to work, when June 15th came, I'm in big doo-doo. I can't afford to send my children to summer camp. Those are the children that end up losing a lot.
Right.
They end up in trouble. I think it's more than important, more than having a teacher with a higher education. A good teacher loves kids. A good teacher, in my opinion, thinks outside of the box, is innovative.
Right.
And children want to come to her class. I also think there should be a time when teachers should be released from their work, given their pension, and said sayonara, because they're tired. They can't repeat it over again. You
Right.
need new, young, bright faces, and you need people of color to be teachers, to work with children of color who they can relate to.
Well, we all of those thoughts are reflected in the commission report. One of the things that, in making teaching a high-status profession, one of the things we learned is that in the U.S., teachers spend way more time in a classroom with kids. In the high-performing systems, they have release time to work on curriculum, to work together to develop new pedagogical strategies. Too often in our systems, teachers have to work in isolation. And they don't do that in the high-performing countries. So that is definitely one of our recommendations. I also want to comment that you made a very good point about the economic benefit of having kids in school longer. That's an interesting point with early childhood education. Imagine the difference it's going to make for low-income parents if they have full-day preschool for their 3- and 4-year-olds. That's free for low-income parents. That enables them to be not to be paying for daycare and have the freedom to pursue greater hours in the workplace.
Well, thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
The state of Maryland appreciates it.
Thank you.
Oscar?
Hi, I'm Oscar Barberan. I'm the chair of African American Studies, professor of psychology as well. So I'm not an educator, but I've been very much invested in education. I teach a course called Reducing the Achievement, the Black-White Achievement Gap. And in that course, we try to talk about a variety of ideas. There are a couple I'd like to propose to you and to see what you think. The first begins with the notion that it really is quite difficult to find time to train teachers, that training at the undergraduate level is compacted and trying to add more is difficult. And in addition, once they're in service, finding time is quite difficult. So if we have a program where we think that would be helpful to teachers, getting them release time, finding time for them to participate in training is really quite difficult. So time is a very critical issue. So one of the ideas that our class came up with is the idea of fellowships for teachers, sabbaticals for teachers, that might provide them, say, even if it's just a day off, where they could be involved in intensive training. Because we know that teachers aren't fully formed once they graduate, and we know that it takes a while for them to mature, and that there are many different things coming along the way, but there are very few structures that are in place to allow them to enhance their skills. The current approaches to professional development, often limited to 3 days a week, typically aren't very effective. And those that are effective usually involve intensive coaching and other things like that. Again, that involves time. So I'm curious about whether this was an issue that came up as you thought about enhancing teaching as a profession.
I'll make a comment, but maybe you would like to add to it. Absolutely, and as I said just a few moments ago, the notion of thinking of teachers as real professionals that are working together to improve the performance of the school, not their individual class, but working collaboratively to make the schools better. That's what the high-performing schools do around the world. So that's why this notion of building into the day time when teachers are not in front of students, but they're working in collaboration on, advancing the curriculum, new pedagogical strategies. I was thinking the other day, my son is an architect. If a big project comes into their office, they don't take an architect and say, go design the building. They all come together and they, analyze what the problems are and they come up with the solutions. That's how professionals work. That's how it works in high-performing school systems around the world. We don't have that environment in our schools, and we have to create it. In terms of getting more people interested in teaching, one of our recommendations is we need a big public relations information campaign to talk about the higher salaries, the career ladder, the profession, making this a high-status profession. And there's a lot of money recommended for fellowships, room, board, and tuition for kids, bright kids who want to go into teaching, provided they will spend a certain number of years in school serving low-income students. So, this whole notion of making teaching a much more attractive profession through the kinds of things you're talking about, it was really very much on the Commission's mind.
Right. So my sense is that, for example, if we hope to increase the number of African American and Latino men in teaching, that provision of scholarships, for example, would really be important.
Yes. Yes.
Perhaps for everyone, but particularly for them.
We want all of our schools to help with this, but it's also, we mentioned specifically our HBCUs, getting them to help in the production of more teachers of color. But
We have
you must have some thoughts on that
we
subject.
have a couple of initiatives going, but I'm going to let Lawrence talk about one of them.
So one of the recommendations in the Kirwan Commission that Brit just mentioned is this idea of transforming the school day and transforming the work of teachers. Our teachers teach too much and plan too little collaboratively. And we know that if we are going to make influence instructional practice, we have to use the effective strategies of research-based professional development, meaning that it should be sustained over time, that it should be job-embedded, that it should be practice-based. So if we can create models in which that exists, but I feel that recommendation is going to be one of the most difficult recommendations to employ, because changing the nature of a school and the time allotment and the responsibilities of teachers. Let me give you an example of a project that we engaged in at actually Walker Mill Middle School in Prince George's County Schools. The mathematics education faculty here and graduate students here at Maryland, we went out and created a partnership with the Walker Mill community to do just that, to try to better understand how can we help to and support the transformation of teaching through collaboration, through having the math group meet together, videotape their own practice, publicly share their practice, which is a very difficult thing for teachers to do, and go through cycles of continuous improvement. Fantastic project. It was externally funded, which you know what that means. The funds ran out. And it did cost, because it did cost money. We had to get substitutes to come in and relieve teachers of their instructional duties at particular times. It was transformational, but the principal had to be on board, the rest of the school had to be on board, the students have to be on board, because there are different ways of teaching. So it is not a trivial recommendation to suggest that what you're suggesting and the recommendation, because it's truly a different way that schools will be structured, and I'm hoping that the state of Maryland makes that a priority, because you can ratchet up the salary, you can do a lot of things to professionalize the field, but unless you change the conditions of teaching, I don't think it's necessarily going to attract and keep. I mean, you mentioned in one of your slides that we're losing as many teachers as we're producing, or there's some things going on in schools that it is making it a place where people step out. So oftentimes we're concerned about production, but that retention issue is something that we must address, and we must address through structural changes in schools.
And we do know that the way we typically do professional development is not very effective. So this approach may cost a lot more, but it may be much more cost effective because it actually has an impact. And the way we're throwing resources into professional development, one and done, and seat time, and it doesn't change practice at all, that's just wasted resources.
So it seems like that also what you're suggesting also has implications for staffing. So that to think about one teacher per classroom probably is not going to work. And so it's going to require increases in staffing.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And thus the price tag.
Yeah. The next question is coming up. I mentioned the career ladder, and just to give that a little more definition, there would be steps in the career ladder, and there would be one step would be a lead teacher, then there'd be a master teacher, and then I think it's called a professor master teacher, and these designations would be determined basically by the principal and the superintendents based upon recommendations from other master teachers in this district, who would observe and make recommendations. And I happen to think universities do a pretty good job on personnel evaluation, at least with faculty. The assistant professor, and then you're the associate professor, and then a professor, and ultimately the president, based on recommendations coming up the line, make that determination. And that's sort of the model that is reflected in this career ladder. And the plan would be that for the master teacher and the professor, these would be the teachers that were the mentors and managed the induction of new teachers. It wouldn't be a random assignment. You would have the very best teachers serving as the mentor and the leader in the induction of new teachers. I think it's a really important point in the model that's being proposed. Excuse us, please.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Dr. Alonzo Sasso, and thank you for your work with the commission. As the commission thought about with the new activation of creating one standard diploma and then an additional standard diploma with the industrial or CTE credentials, so some of those students could have that alignment to go straight to work, or to have an alignment of credentials going straight into the colleges so they can continue their education and go from point A to point B. That's one thing I'm asking. The other thing that I like to ask, with the teacher preparation, and I've been hearing this kind of echoed in your through the panel and through those who have been having shared information. One thing I feel that's significant, and I hope that this could be introduced into the commission, that cultural proficiency and cultural adaptation when it comes to teacher delivery and cultural delivery with Latino and African American students. If you come from a teacher education program with that armor, it will make it seamless, and it can create some type of halt with that revolving door in teaching, because it's not always the salary
You're absolutely right.
that teachers leave the profession. It's the cultural adaptation of being relatable.
Yeah. I can be very brief in my response, because absolutely, I mean, what you just said is almost, not verbatim, but reflected absolutely in the report. The whole issue of cultural competence, restorative practices. Not only is the commission saying that new teachers should have that as part of the teacher preparation programs, but existing teachers, through professional development, need to go through some training in these areas. We can't wait for a whole new generation of teachers to come along. So we've got to be working with our existing teachers as well on the very issues you're discussing.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add that I feel like we need to consider not just the training of teachers, but the selection of teachers to go into programs in the first place. We have students and adults who really don't need to be with children. And it's just the truth, based on their dispositions, their attitudes, the ways in which they have deficit perspectives around, and we could probably try to teach them to be better, but maybe we should just not enter, maybe they shouldn't enter the educator preparation program in the first place. And we need better mechanisms to tease that out, because it's too late when they're with students. Once they have a contract in a school district, it's too late. So we have to do a better job with selection as well as training.
And I hear something Brenda just said, and I couldn't agree more. It's something we're also working on. That is to give students early experiences in the classroom so that they can try it on, they can see what it's like, we can work with them. So not waiting until that last experience. And so I think those early experiences, that's a hallmark of our Terrapin Teachers program. I'm pointing to Dan Chazen in the back, who directs that program. But I think that's an important step in helping to sort that out and helping young people sort that out for themselves.
Hi, my name is Jessica Katz. I formerly was a teacher, so I'm one of those, I made it 5 years and then couldn't hack it really. And I'm currently in grad school here at the university in the school counseling program. So my question was kind of around what the NCEE used in some of the comparisons with other school districts, especially in terms of the international school districts that they were being compared to. Many of them don't have the level of diversity that we have here in the United States and specifically in Maryland. And so I'm wondering what the thoughts were around that, because they wouldn't have the same kind of systemic racism issues that our students have in our school systems.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious in general about what the commission kind of was able to take away from that, just knowing that our students are having a much different struggle than students are in more homogenous countries.
Right. Excellent point, and obviously an issue of great concern to the commission. So we certainly learned from the experiences of these high-performing systems and adopted many of their policies and practices, but we also had to adapt these recommendations to the context of the state of Maryland. I will say that some of the countries we studied are more diverse than one might think. For example, Singapore has an enormously diverse population. And including some groups that have been discriminated against in significant numbers. So, I mean, there was something to learn from their experiences, but we had to adapt what our recommendations are based on the Maryland context and things that we learned from other research on best practices.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Rebecca Ryan. I'm a student in the School Counseling Masters here at Maryland. And I was thinking about the 40% college career readiness, or below 40% right now. And I'm a little bit curious about how counseling has been discussed within preparing students to become more ready. I think a lot of times we focus on teachers, and there are more teachers in the building, obviously, but often counselors who have been in the schools for a while may not be as up to date on some of the different economic trends and different industry trends as they're preparing students to leave high school. And so I'm wondering to what extent you've kind of discussed training for counselors who are already placed in the schools to help them so that when these students are achieving college career readiness, counselors are also, and schools are also equipped with the tools to then help students actually obtain those post-secondary.
Right. Well, one of the recommendations is that we want to bring career counseling down into the middle schools with counselors that will have to be trained, obviously. We need more counselors. And to the extent that we don't have enough initially, there have to be some professional development to get it done. But have in every district some career counseling, not to direct kids in a certain way, but to expose them to the wealth of opportunities that are out there. So at a very early stage, they can be thinking about what their career options might be. But you will find, if you have a chance to look through the report, that counseling comes up in various forms over and over again in the report. I would say we heard lots of testimony from many different groups, and up at the top in the advice and recommendations that we got was the need for much more and better counseling of all types at all levels. So I think you will find that it's an issue that is attended to pretty significantly in the report.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Flora G., and I am an alumni of the College of Education here at University of Maryland. And I've been working in early childhood for 43 years, 29 as a preschool director and owner in Greenbelt. I have had a public school pre-kindergarten in my center for 19 years now as part of what we're talking about as coming for more programs. And I am operating at the level of Maryland Excels Level 5, which is the highest level of quality. And it's not an easy feat to get there and stay there. But as we're thinking about how to help grow more teachers in early childhood education, talk about low teacher salaries. Those working in childcare are the lowest paid professionals. And we have to really start stepping up some utilization of some quality programs that are existing in Maryland. There's the College and Career Development Fund, which will pay for college and books for students to go to college and get a degree and become a teacher in early childhood education. But there are very few colleges and universities in Maryland, this one included, that does not participate in that program. So that's a barrier. And I think that I've been a member of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. I'm a life member there, and they're developing power to the profession. And so there'll be similar levels of teachers as you were describing for early childhood, level 1, level 2, level 3. But we have to really help our programs grow the teachers, because the biggest barrier to becoming a level 5 center is going to be the teachers meeting the qualifications. That's the biggest barrier. So we've got to really step up what we're doing, and we want to see high quality programs exist for all these children that need it, especially the low-income children. And the subsidy program in Maryland has doubled the amount of income that families can make and access a child care voucher, and that's going to help tremendously, but it's just getting started. We need more public awareness. But I would like to know, well, first I want to thank you, because knowing to invest in early childhood education, if you look at the Heckman equation, and we know that for every dollar we invest, we get about $7 back in rewards to society. So what are we going to do in the Kirwan Commission to help grow early childhood teachers that are outside of the public school system and really help parents and their families?
Well, we clearly need to produce more. There's going to be a huge demand for more early childhood educators, and they certainly will be part of the career ladder that we're establishing. So our thinking very much is that they'll be part of the salary strategy that we have, the compensation strategy that we have for teachers, no different than those that are in the K through 12 sector.
We'd like to see that.
Okay, we're going to take the last 2 questions of folks standing up. I think we're losing some of our students to go to class time. Thank you for coming. I'm waving at faculty leaving. But I think we have time for these last 2.
Liz Nuss, and I'm a citizen in Baltimore City, and I'm working to help other people provide equity and access to Baltimore City public school children in the arts. And Brit, the fact that you not only chaired the commission, but you've been on the road and you've been selling the program and speaking, what advice do you have for us as citizens in the state of Maryland that we don't drop the ball, that it's nice that we have a 3-year plan, but in 10 years, we all know what happened to Thornton. It sort of gets put away. And I think the engagement of citizen leaders right now throughout the state, and particularly parents, to become better consumers when they're in, particularly in Baltimore City. It's a really important issue, and I'd be curious what insights you might have to share with us.
Thank you.
So this audience can keep up the work.
Thank you, Liz. You all would have no way of knowing, but Liz and I have worked together for many years. When I became the provost of the university, I'd been department chairman for 4 years, and I didn't know what I was doing when I became provost. And Liz was in the chancellor or president's office at the time, and she was just an invaluable source of wisdom and counsel to me as I began to grow my sea legs in that position. But Liz has asked a very, very good question. You know, this won't happen for our state unless there's a and people want it. It has to be a groundswell of support for it. The legislature, the governor, they've got to hear from people that this is really important, and this has got to be a top priority. We got to find a way to do it. Otherwise, it won't happen. You know, there are a number of organizations that have sprung up. The one is called Strong Schools Maryland, and they have net teams in every county in the state who are going around and talking about the commission's work, writing letters to the editor, going to commission, county commission meetings, local school board meetings, talking all this up, trying to get the information out there. I think the commission is planning on doing a road show this summer, and we're going to go to every school district in the state and at least inform people of why this is so important and what our recommendations is to hopefully build the groundswell of support that will carry the ball across the goal line. Google Strong Schools Maryland, and you'll find a way in which, if you're interested, I'm not supposed to advocate for this now, but if you're interested, you could become part the Strong School Maryland effort.
Okay, last question.
I'll try to keep it brief. You have introduced a lot of programs and training and 12-month school years, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about professional burnout, which we obviously know is very accurate with how often we lose teachers and other school officials,
Right.
and how that would be addressed with the implementation of so many new programs on top of having to
Right.
continue to keep your school running.
Right. Well, if you look at the high-performing systems, they don't have burnout. People want to be a teacher. It has prestige. It has good compensation comparable to other professions. They work as professionals in the schools. They don't work in isolation. They're part of a collective effort to make the school better and better and better. Through their collaboration, what they bring. They have a lot more autonomy, the teachers do, within the schools. That's what we want to create in Maryland. That's what these recommendations, if they were implemented, would drive. That's the kind of environment that we would see in our schools. That's how we would address the burnout issue.
And that's a good note to end on, because no resource is more important in our schools than having good educators, and that includes teachers, leaders, counselors, all of them. So we need to work in that direction. I think this funding, both the direct funding as well as the funding for the collaboratives, so that we can continue our partnership with our local school districts, are really going to move the needle on this. Right. So I just want to end with a quote that I pulled out of Brit's comments. This is important. It's got to be a high priority, and I think that's absolutely the case.
Well,
so
let me just say that, as you can tell by my white hair, I've been in education for a long time. I came to this campus in 1964 as an assistant professor of mathematics, so just do the arithmetic. And I've had a lot of different positions. And I will say this is both the hardest and most important thing I have done with my colleagues on the commission in my professional life. If we can deliver this for the state, it will change Maryland for generations to come. Yeah. That's what's at stake. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Our future depends on it. It's what I say. When whoever asks what we can do is tell young people that teaching and education is a good profession, because that's not the message that they're getting. So I think that is a big step, and it will change the course of our future. So, Brit, I want to thank you for your leadership, for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.